Welcome to Old Lantern Tales, where every story holds a secret, shadows, mysteries, and whispers from the past, all waiting for you. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The House That Had Already Killed. It was June 14th, 1891, when Holmes and I arrived at Blackthorne Manor. 2 days past the funeral, yet already too late for peace. The Surrey countryside was unnaturally still. No birds sang. No servants scurried to meet us. Only the wind moved, threading through the ancient oaks like a whisper that had learned to speak without sound. I could feel it, a presence in every sway of the branches, as though the land itself held its breath. Blackthorne Manor loomed ahead, tall and severe. Its dark windows did not reflect the sun, they absorbed it. A house that endured visitors rather than welcomed them. And it waited. Lord Alistair Blackthorne had died quietly in his bed, the doctors said. Heart failure, peaceful, untroubled. Yet Holmes had been summoned after the burial, and I trusted his instincts to tell me all I needed to know. The gravel crunched beneath the carriage wheels, shattering the silence. Holmes said nothing. His eyes flicked across the gates, the windows, the ivy climbing the stone walls. Freshly trimmed. Too freshly. Someone had wanted the house to appear orderly again, quickly. We dismounted. Holmes lingered at the gate, fingers brushing the iron latch. Notice anything, Watson? I saw then, a shallow scratch along the metal. Recent. Sloppy. Something dragged, not carried. Before I could speak, the manor door opened. Lady Eleanor Blackthorne waited. Her posture was perfect, her face composed as if greeting guests for tea rather than investigators summoned after her husband's death. Behind her, Edmund paced the hall, measured and deliberate. The butler, Mr. Haversham, stood still, not watching us but Holmes. Inside, the air smelled of polished wood and something else beneath it. Sweet. Metallic. It lingered at the back of my throat. The house was immaculate. Too immaculate. Chairs aligned, rugs unwrinkled. Yet betrayals remained. A chair inches out of place, a grandfather clock frozen at 11:17. A moment preserved, a secret held. Holmes wandered, cataloging portraits, fireplaces, medicine cabinets. He asked nothing, yet the house answered him in silence. Edmund hovered nearby, correcting servants on trivialities, asserting authority that had no title. Shadows danced against the walls as the wind pressed against the windows, chandeliers trembling in response. I leaned closer to Holmes. What do you make of it? His gaze lingered on the frozen clock, then drifted toward the sealed bedroom door. When he spoke, it was low, almost gentle. Watson, when a man dies peacefully in his sleep, a house does not rush to forget him. This man did not die in his sleep. The words sank like stones. Outside, the sun slipped behind the hills. Blackthorne Manor fell fully into shadow. The gates closed with a finality that felt wrong. Then, something moved. A shadow against the bedroom door, too fluid, too quick. Not Edmund, not Lady Eleanor. It was watching. A whisper brushed through the hall, or perhaps from the wind itself. He should not be here. I shivered. Holmes' eyes narrowed. He had noticed it too. The house had awakened, and we had crossed its threshold. The first death had been a spark. What waited inside Blackthorne Manor now was patient, deliberate, watching, waiting, and we were not merely visitors. We were intruders. I stepped closer to Holmes, voice hushed. Is it alive? Holmes did not answer. He only watched the sealed door, his expression unreadable. The house seemed to pulse in response, shadows rippling like water, the smell of metal growing stronger. Then the wind carried it again, a sigh, a threat, a promise. I felt the weight of it pressing into my chest, leaving no room for doubt. Whatever had begun here had not finished. It had only begun, and we were in its way. Chapter 2. The Inheritance That Arrived Too Early. The morning of June 15th, 1891, arrived without warmth. Though the sun had risen over the Surrey hills, Blackthorne Manor remained shrouded in shadow. Heavy velvet curtains were drawn tight, and the air inside felt heavier than the day outside. It was as though the house itself wished to keep the light at bay. Every tick of the clock seemed sharper, more accusing. The family gathered in the grand drawing room for the reading of Lord Alastair Blackthorne's will. The space felt less like a room for legal formalities than a chamber where judgment hung in the air, waiting to be delivered. Holmes and I took our seats near the fireplace. The embers glowed faintly, offering no comfort. Silence pressed in from all sides. Mr. Fairchild, the family solicitor, stood near the writing desk, rigid, his ink-stained fingers twitching as he cleared his throat. His voice trembled slightly, as though the house itself was straining to hear him. He began to read. Formalities passed, names, dates, confirmations. Then the tone shifted. The air grew colder, heavier, as if the room itself exhaled in anticipation. The entirety of Blackthorne Manor, Fairchild intoned, including lands, holdings, and financial assets, shall pass to Edmund Blackthorne. The words struck the room like a cold blade. No gasp, no protest, only silence. Lady Eleanor's hands lay folded in her lap. Her eyes did not move, not toward her son, not toward the solicitor, not toward the witnesses. They stared at the floor, sealed and unreadable. Edmund exhaled softly, almost imperceptibly. Holmes noticed. That single breath carried relief, ownership, finality. But in it, I felt something darker, a flicker of satisfaction that did not belong in mourning. Fairchild continued. Lady Eleanor was granted nothing. Extended relatives received no allowances, no delayed settlements. The clock on the mantel ticked loudly now, each second carving into the room with cold precision. Holmes leaned forward, voice barely above a whisper. Revised how long ago? 3 weeks prior to Lord Blackthorne's death, Fairchild replied. 3 weeks. Before illness. Before decline. Before death. Why rewrite a will when one believes they will live? The servants along the far wall shifted. One young maid twisted her apron so tightly it strained. Her breaths were shallow, uneven. Panic poorly disguised as obedience. Holmes' gaze followed mine, noting each flicker of fear. Then a whisper came, soft as a shadow. He warned him. Holmes' head snapped toward it. Watson, listen. It came again, clearer. James, a footman, stood rigid, eyes fixed to the floor. He had spoken unconsciously. When he realized it, his face drained of color. Holmes moved toward him deliberately. Speak freely. Silence serves no one here. There was an argument, James said, voice trembling. Late, the night before Lord Blackthorne passed. Lady Eleanor stiffened. Edmund did not. Between whom? Holmes asked. The master and his son, James said. Voices raised. Threats made. Lord Blackthorne said some things could not be taken before their time. The room seemed to shrink. Shadows in the corners stretched unnaturally. The candlelight flickered as if disturbed by invisible fingers. The air turned sharp, metallic. Holmes' eyes, cold and steady, studied every face. Lady Eleanor's composure cracked. Not grief, but a long-contained resentment. Edmund paced, irritation flickering across his features like fault lines beneath stone. The servants trembled in silent obedience. Fairchild finished the lesser bequests, but no one heard them. The document had already done its work. The inheritance was not simply given. It had drawn lines, divided the living, and stirred forces that had slept. Holmes leaned close to me, voice a murmur. This was not inheritance, Watson. It was succession. Someone arrived at the future before they were meant to. Then, a scream tore through the manor. High, piercing, final. It came from the west wing. The shadows along the walls twisted as if recoiling. A cold draft rushed the room, carrying the metallic tang of blood. Lady Eleanor gasped, not in shock, but recognition. Edmund's face blanched. The servants froze, ice running through their veins. Holmes moved like a shadow, deliberate, silent, unstoppable. I followed. The scream had not announced chaos. It had confirmed order. Another body had been found. And as the cold, metallic air pressed against my skin, a single truth settled in my mind, icy and certain. The inheritance had not arrived early by accident. It had arrived exactly on schedule, and whatever plan had begun weeks ago was no longer waiting. Chapter 3. The Locked Room. The West Wing was alive with panic before we even reached it. Servants clustered along the corridor, whispering in broken fragments, their faces pale in the flickering candlelight. Shadows stretched long, bending unnaturally as if the walls themselves were leaning in to watch. Holmes cut through them with quiet authority, and the passage cleared almost magically. At the end of the hall, a single oil lamp burned on the floor like a vigil, casting trembling light across the closed door. "This is where the scream came from," I said, my voice barely carrying over the sound of my own pulse. Holmes nodded, studying the door with his habitual precision. "And no one has entered since." The key protruded from the lock, inside. That alone set my nerves on edge. Under Holmes' instruction, the butler retrieved tools, and the door was opened. What lay beyond was almost surreal in its normalcy. The room was small, orderly, painfully so. No overturned furniture, no signs of struggle, no obvious wounds. A young footman, Thomas, lay collapsed near the bed, his eyes wide with frozen terror. Death had come swiftly, silently, almost ceremoniously. "A locked room," I murmured. From the inside. Holmes knelt beside the body, hands precise, eyes scanning every detail. He examined the collar, the floorboards, the hands. Then, almost imperceptibly, he noticed the perfection in what should have been chaos. "The arrangement is wrong," he said finally, voice calm, deliberate. He rose and approached the door. Fine scratches, barely visible in the lamplight, marred the lock. Recent. Intentional. "This door was secured after death," Holmes said quietly. A chill ran through me. "Then the lock is a performance," he finished. "And a clever one." Silence followed. Lady Eleanor stood a few paces back, hands clenched tightly, knuckles white. Edmund leaned against the wall, carefully neutral, yet every glance betrayed him. The servants avoided the body, shifting uncomfortably in the oppressive quiet. Holmes moved to the window, dust undisturbed. No escape there. He turned, eyes sweeping the room once more. "The killer required knowledge, time, and confidence," he said. "Confidence enough to leave the body knowing it would be discovered." I felt it then. The air itself seemed to thicken. Shadows moved where they shouldn't, stretching along corners and edges. A cold draft brushed my neck, carrying a metallic tang that made my stomach churn. Whispers rose and fell in the hallway behind us, footsteps that were no one's, fleeting and impossible to place. Holmes addressed the household, calm, deliberate. "No one leaves Blackthorne Manor tonight." A collective breath caught, the flicker of a candle throwing sharp shadows across their faces. "There is a murderer among you," he said, voice steady, unyielding. "And this house is now a closed system." He turned to me, lowering his voice. "The first death created motive. This one confirms method." I swallowed hard. "And the next?" Holmes' gaze followed the darkened hallway stretching deeper into the manor, shadows pooling like ink. "If we are not careful," he said, "it will come sooner than any of them expect." At that moment, the lamps flickered violently. Somewhere deeper in the house, a door creaked open and shut on its own. A faint, metallic scent lingered in the air. My heart raced. Every instinct screamed that the house was no longer simply a backdrop. It was complicit, alive, and hungry for fear. A low, almost imperceptible whisper brushed past my ear. "They shouldn't be here." I spun, but the corridor was empty. Holmes did not move. He simply observed, calculating, unreadable. I realized with a cold certainty that the killer had left a signature, not just the deaths, but a warning. The manor had become a trap. Every soul within it, a suspect, a target, a pawn. And we were already inside the first move. Chapter 4. A House of Half-Truths. By June 16, 1891, it had become painfully clear that no one inside Blackthorne Manor was innocent of secrecy. The house awoke before dawn, yet moved with the eerie precision of something alive but not human. Shadows clung to corners, stretching unnaturally as if the walls themselves had teeth. Holmes glided through the corridors with measured silence, pausing at closed doors, listening. not just to voices, but to hesitation, to breath, to the weight of what remained unsaid. I followed close behind, notebook in hand, pulse thrumming like a drumbeat. Every floorboard groaned beneath our steps. Every distant whisper seemed amplified by the house itself. The butler, Mr. Haversham, was first. He stood rigid, silver tray in hand, claiming the east wing had occupied him the entire night. His voice was steady, but the tray trembled. Holmes said nothing, letting his eyes drift to subtle betrayals, scuffed floorboards, a chair inches out of place, faint smudges on polished surfaces. Haversham swallowed, tension coiling around him like a visible shadow. Lady Eleanor was next, questioned alone. She sat upright, composed to the point of fragility, fingers folded like porcelain. When Holmes asked her whereabouts the night her husband died, her reply flowed smoothly, until it did not. A single phrase faltered, contradicting a prior statement. Holmes leaned closer, silent, waiting. The room itself seemed to tighten around us. Lady Eleanor's hands twisted her lace handkerchief unconsciously. Grace, I realized, could be a mask as deliberate as deception. Then Edmund stepped forward. He spoke confidently of a late walk to the stables, claiming restless thoughts demanded fresh air. But his timeline collided ever so slightly with a servant's earlier account. A lantern seen, a door heard, a sound misplaced in time. Holmes noted every pause, every glance Edmund cast toward his mother. Even in his certainty, something trembled beneath the surface. No story aligned fully. None were clean. As Holmes moved from room to room, questioning each servant, the web of half-truths thickened. Nervous tics, selective memory, subtle contradictions, small omissions that screamed louder than lies. One young maid, once eager to testify during the will reading, now faltered at her own recollections, fear pressing against her ribs as if the house itself demanded silence. And the manor seemed complicit. Portraits watched from the walls, their eyes following us. A painting hung crookedly. A door remained ajar where it should have been shut. A faint smell of cigar smoke lingered in a hallway no one admitted to using. Shadows pooled in corners, moving slightly when no one was there, as if the house inhaled with every whispered answer. I felt it, a creeping, suffocating realization. This was not chaos. It was orchestration. Lady Eleanor's gaze kept drifting toward the master bedroom, rehearsing stories she had not yet been forced to tell. Edmund's patience frayed, twitching like a fault line beneath stone. Haversham avoided my gaze entirely, his posture tense, every motion a question mark. Every contradiction Holmes drew from them tightened the noose. Each lie built on another, until the house itself seemed to close in. Footsteps echoed too loudly. Whispers carried farther than they should. Even the crackle of the fireplace felt like a warning. Holmes stopped, motioning me closer. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Watson, there were 2 murders." He paused, eyes dark and unreadable. But only one plan. The words landed like ice, freezing every nerve in my body. Every hesitation, every lie, every trembling hand now aligned into a single, deliberate design. Someone had engineered grief itself, using trust, routine, and silence as instruments. The danger was no longer hidden in dark corners. It lived in every sentence spoken, every rehearsed gesture, every heartbeat measured. And the mastermind was still inside Blackthorne Manor, watching, waiting, calculating. A cold gust swept through the hall, carrying the metallic tang of something recent, blood, perhaps, or iron itself. A shadow shifted along the stairwell, too fluid, too fast to belong to a person. I caught it from the corner of my eye, and it was gone the next instant, leaving only the suffocating certainty of intent. The house had grown colder around us, and in that cold, I understood. We were in the calm center of a storm, one whose true violence had yet to strike, and strike it would. Chapter 5. The Method Hidden in Plain Sight. It was the morning of June 17th, 1891, when Holmes summoned me to the dining room. His expression was sharp, almost electric, as though the manor itself had whispered a secret into his mind. The house was unnaturally still, yet I could feel it leaning in, waiting, anticipating. "Watson," he said, voice calm but slicing through the heavy air. The weapon was never hidden, it was ignored. I frowned. My eyes followed him to the breakfast table, a cup of tea half finished, a bottle of medicine, a glass of wine. Ordinary objects, banal, benign, but under Holmes' scrutiny, each seemed charged with silent malice. Both victims, he continued, eyes narrowing, consumed something ordinary, something trusted, something completely overlooked. My pulse quickened, the air around me suddenly thick, almost viscous, as though the house itself had grown heavier with intent. He moved around the table with deliberate care, examining each object, noting subtle residue, faint smells, minor disturbances invisible to all but the keenest eye. His gaze swept the silver tray, still warm from service, the tilt of a cup, the way the spoon had been placed. Politeness, order, routine, everything had been weaponized. The killer, he murmured, relied on habit, on expectation, on manners. I shivered involuntarily. The elegance of the method was terrifying. Death had been choreographed into the mundane. The tilt of a cup, the clink of silver, a sip taken without thought, all became instruments of fate. Even the seemingly innocent gestures of the household were transformed into executioner's tools. Holmes' eyes flicked to Lady Eleanor. She sat poised, composed, serene, untouchable, almost angelic. Had she unknowingly played her part in this deadly dance? Or had she been manipulated into performing it? His gaze then swept Edmund, then Haversham, cataloging who had access at what time, who had handled the tea, the wine, the medicine, who had lingered too long, who had watched too closely. Each trivial action became a thread in a web of meticulous calculation. Every polite word, every measured step, every breath was now part of a lethal symphony. Everything must appear normal, Holmes whispered, his voice low, so that I had to lean in to hear. And yet, every movement, every glance, every sip, it was all part of the plan. A shiver ran down my spine. I felt it in my hands, cold and trembling. Shadows shifted along the walls, dancing with the flickering candlelight. A metallic tang lingered faintly in the air, sharp and accusing. Somewhere, deep in the house, a floorboard groaned, a whisper of movement I could not place. I imagined the killer watching from hidden recesses, smiling with cold, absolute confidence. Every gesture of politeness, every minor ritual, had been a mask for murder. And all the while, the participants went about their days, blissfully unaware that they were complicit in a carefully staged performance of death. Holmes straightened suddenly, a rare flare of urgency crossing his features. He leaned toward me, voice slicing through the thickening air. "Watson, the final murder has not yet happened." The words struck like thunder. I felt my stomach tighten. The elegance, the intelligence, the cruelty of it all had been revealed, but the climax, the ultimate strike, remained pending. The manor seemed to pulse around us, shadows lengthening unnaturally, the fire crackling as if warning us. Every movement of the staff, every glance from the family, even the faint flicker of candlelight now carried weight, a potential prelude to the next act of violence. I realized, with icy certainty, that we had been witnesses to careful orchestration. Yet the mastermind remained unseen, still hidden in plain sight. And then it happened, a subtle sound, almost imperceptible, the soft creak of a door opening somewhere deeper in the manor. A shadow passed along the far wall, moving faster than any person could, leaving only the sense of a presence, patient, watchful, and ready. The house had grown alive with menace. Every heartbeat now carried consequence. Every breath could be the last. The killer was here, watching, waiting, and Blackthorne Manor was ready to claim another life. Chapter 6. The Dinner That Was Meant to Kill Again. It was the evening of June 17th, 1891, when Holmes insisted we dine together in the grand hall of Blackthorne Manor. The room seemed to shrink as we entered, candlelight flickering against the polished oak table, casting long, distorted shadows across the anxious faces of the family and staff. Every seat was taken, yet the air felt alive, vibrating with fear, suspicion, and unspoken dread. Holmes moved with a predator's calm, arranging silverware, adjusting glasses, observing every twitch, every hesitation. I sat beside him, aware of the invisible threat hovering over the table, the poison he had uncovered earlier still lurking somewhere. A single sip could claim a life, and I knew the killer had counted on it. The room's silence was suffocating. Lady Eleanor's hands trembled faintly as she poured herself a small measure of wine, forcing composure over panic. Edmund's eyes darted toward the servants, searching for reassurance he would never receive. Even Haversham, the butler, moved with precise, flawless etiquette, yet the stiffness in his shoulders betrayed the quiet terror beneath his mask of control. Holmes' gaze swept the table like a hawk, cataloging every movement. Who reached first, who hesitated, who avoided their glass entirely. Politeness, order, habit, they had all become weapons in a game none of us had volunteered to play. "Notice, Watson," he whispered, his voice slicing through the tension. "Who acts without thought, and who falters even for a heartbeat? The smallest hesitation betrays them." I obeyed, my pulse hammering, sweat prickling at the back of my neck. Every glance, every breath, every clink of cutlery became a potential trigger. Outside, the wind rattled the tall windows, sounding almost conspiratorial, like a warning or an encouragement. Shadows stretched and writhed across the walls, twisting with every flicker of candlelight, teasing the imagination with phantom movements. Then it happened. A hand lingered too long over a wine glass. A foot tapped with nervous rhythm against the polished floor. Eyes flickered toward another guest, and in that fraction of a second, Holmes' sharp gaze caught the betrayal. "The killer has revealed themselves," he said softly, eyes gleaming with quiet satisfaction. The room seemed to constrict around us. The walls pressed closer, the air thickened with fear. Every heartbeat sounded deafening in my ears. Shadows deepened into shapes, twisting and bending with malevolent intent. The predator's mask, meticulously maintained, was cracking under the scrutiny of observation. Holmes straightened, voice calm, yet absolute. "You have already confessed." The words landed like ice. Heads turned sharply, faces drained of color, eyes widening in terror. Calculation gave way to panic. The killer's composure, so carefully rehearsed, shattered in the face of undeniable logic. Candlelight danced across the polished floor, highlighting the inevitability of truth closing in. Yet even as the murderer trembled, a deeper dread lingered. Blackthorne Manor had swallowed countless secrets, many lives, many masks, but one final truth remained unseen. The unmasking had begun, but the ultimate revelation, the one that would shake the family, the staff, and even me, had yet to surface. A faint creak echoed from the far corner, almost lost beneath the quiet shuffle of chairs. I caught a flicker of movement, a shadow that did not belong, sliding along the wall, merging with the darkness. The manor itself seemed to lean closer, its ancient timbers groaning, as if breathing with malicious awareness. Every step, every glance, every subtle gesture now carried weight. The killer had been exposed, but the house had not finished its game. And in that instant, I realized with chilling certainty, the predator was trapped, but the trap was far from safe. Blackthorne Manor had more to claim before the night ended. And I knew, with a shiver crawling down my spine, that another strike was already being calculated somewhere, unseen, in the shadows. The deadly game was not over. It had merely entered its final, most terrifying act. Chapter 7. The Unmasking at Blackthorne Manor. It was late into the night of June 17, 1891, when Holmes summoned everyone to the grand drawing room. The storm outside had become a living entity, rain thrashing against the windows, wind rattling shutters, lightning illuminating dark corners in violent bursts. Inside, the air was taut, thick with fear, each breath a potential confession. Holmes' voice cut through the oppressive silence, calm yet absolute. The truth was not shouted. It was spoken softly, and it destroyed everything. I leaned forward, heart hammering, as he began unraveling the web of deceit that had claimed 2 lives. His words were precise, scalpel sharp, each revelation cutting through the meticulous choreography of murder. Edmund, the heir, had orchestrated every detail with chilling precision. He had timed the deaths, manipulated routines, and weaponized trust, politeness, and habit to conceal the poison he administered. Weeks of preparation ensured that grief and expectation would mask the sinister hand guiding events. Every inconsistency, the scratches on doors, misplaced chairs, adjusted schedules, had been invisible to all but a mind like Holmes. The family sat frozen. Lady Eleanor gasped, realization like ice creeping down her spine. Even the butler, Haversham, faltered. The perfect composure he clung to was cracking beneath manipulation he barely understood. Holmes' eyes never left Edmund. Each twitch, each faltering glance, each shadow of guilt flickered in the candlelight. The heir's arrogance began to crumble under scrutiny, yet his defiance lingered. Then he spoke, calm but dangerous. "Would you have done differently?" The words hung in the air like a blade. Every heartbeat thundered. Shadows deepened, stretching across walls as if the manor itself leaned closer, listening, absorbing, judging. A flash of lightning illuminated the room, briefly casting Edmund's face in monstrous relief, his features sharper, more menacing than before. Holmes moved deliberately, pacing the room, explaining the mechanics of each death, the tea, the wine, the meals, the timing, the routines, all forming a deadly symphony conducted by Edmund's cold mind. The storm outside mirrored the tension inside, rattling windows, shaking chandeliers, echoing the terror we had barely survived. I saw the heir's confidence fracture, replaced by horror as every deception, every staged accident, every manipulated routine was laid bare. And yet, even in exposure, there was a chilling calculation in his gaze, a lingering threat. Holmes paused, voice lower, cutting through the tension. Every step, every gesture, every heartbeat was predictable to him. And yet, he underestimated the house. The words sent a shiver down my spine. Blackthorne Manor was not merely a backdrop. Its shadows shifted, floorboards groaned. The very walls seemed to pulse with silent judgment. The house had guided, concealed, and observed. And now, in its darkest hour, it bore witness to its final revelation. Edmund's gaze flicked to the corners of the room, to the unseen, the forgotten, the spaces where secrets waited. His lips twitched, the faintest trace of a smile, almost daring us to believe there was more than we could see. Holmes' calm clarity contrasted the storm and the trembling faces around him. The intellectual victory was complete, yet the psychological weight pressed on all of us. Every secret, every manipulation, every death meticulously planned, now exposed, served as a reminder of the fragility of order, trust, and safety. And then, from the far end of the room, a faint creak, a shadow moved where none should have been. The manor was reminding us that the game was never truly over. Holmes glanced at me, eyes sharp, aware of the lingering threat I had almost missed. Edmund had been unmasked, yes, but Blackthorne Manor had claimed more than just lives. It had claimed certainty, innocence, and peace. Even with the truth laid bare, the house retained its power, leaving each of us marked by fear, suspicion, and a haunting sense that another revelation could strike without warning. The storm roared, lightning cracked across the sky, and I realized. The mind of the killer had been exposed, but the house itself, the house had plans far older, far darker. And somewhere, in the twisting corridors of Blackthorne Manor, a secret still waited. Watching, calculating, patient. The game was over. The killer was caught. But Blackthorne Manor had not finished with us. And I knew, with a cold certainty, that none of us would ever leave untouched. Chapter 8. Watson's Final Reflection. We left Blackthorne Manor at dawn on June 18th, 1891. The first pale light spilled over the Surrey hills, yet the weight of the house pressed upon me as though its walls had attached themselves to my thoughts. The storm had passed, leaving the garden slick with rain and windows streaked with water, but the silence of the manor felt permanent, almost sentient, as if it had absorbed every whisper, every scream, every carefully measured deception. Holmes rode beside me, composed, unreadable, his gaze distant yet precise, cataloging every detail in that unyielding mind of his. I, however, could not escape it. The deaths, the manipulation, the patient cruelty, all lingered, crawling through my mind like shadows that refused to dissipate. Even as the manor receded behind us, its turrets looming like dark sentinels above the glimmering fields, it felt alive, watching, silent, and accusing. Justice had been served. Edmund had been unmasked, his carefully constructed facade stripped away. Yet peace did not settle over Blackthorne Manor. The servants who remained would carry fear like a scar. Lady Eleanor would never trust fully again, and Edmund's calculated cruelty had left an indelible mark on everyone who had lived within those walls. Holmes spoke little, as always, yet the occasional glance he cast at the receding silhouette betrayed a mind still reading the house, still searching for secrets hidden in shadows. I tried to focus on the road ahead, on the rising sun and wet fields, yet Blackthorne Manor replayed in my mind in every detail. The locked rooms, the poisoned tea, the invisible routines, the quiet patience of cruelty, the way trust had been weaponized. The horror was not in ghosts or specters, but in the silence of human calculation, in the ordinary acts turned instruments of death. A weight pressed on my chest, heavier than grief, an awareness that some houses are not haunted by the dead, but by the things the living are willing to do. I glanced at Holmes. He was a stoic, unshakable pillar beside me, yet even he could not erase the lingering shadow of what we had witnessed. The manor shrank in the distance, yet its echo followed us, the echo of deceit, of fear, of cunning that could transform a home into a trap, a cage, a stage for orchestrated murder. I remembered the smallest details, the faint scratches on doors, the misaligned chair, the silence that had screamed louder than any shout. And with each recollection, a creeping unease settled deeper within me. Evil does not always announce itself. It waits, patiently, quietly, hidden behind habit, behind manners, behind the familiar and the ordinary. And sometimes, it leaves behind a home that remembers. Even as Surrey opened before us, drenched in the early light, Blackthorne Manor remained vivid in my mind. Its walls had held secrets, its rooms had witnessed calculated cruelty, and the lives we encountered had been forever changed. I realized with chilling clarity, the house had not merely witnessed murder. It had shaped it, guided it, and claimed a piece of everyone within it. I whispered once more, though the wind carried my words far from the carriage. Some houses are not haunted by the dead, but by the things the living were willing to do. The words lingered like mist clinging to the hills, heavy, final, inescapable. And yet, even as we disappeared into the distance, leaving Blackthorne Manor behind, I felt a shadow trail us, subtle but unmistakable, a reminder that the house's influence was far from spent. Perhaps it waits for the next visitor. Perhaps it watches, calculating, patient, ready to awaken again. And as Surrey's morning light bathed the fields, I could not shake the certainty. The story of Blackthorne Manor was far from over. Its silence, its secrets, its darkness, these things endure. And one day, they will speak again. Thank you for visiting Old Lantern Tales. The stories don't end here. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a secret from the shadows. Until next time, keep your lanterns burning.